Good evening, everyone. Welcome to day 10 of our study through the New Testament. And today we hit what we probably would typically call the boring part, and and there's a lot of times the lines that we would skip over. But I wanted to hit these a little bit because this is actually important. This is an important part of the Bible. That's why it's in there, and it shows the lineage. Right, we're talking about Jesus's ancestors here. It shows the lineage of Jesus's tracemen all the way back to, in the case of Luke, all the way back to Adam. In the case of Matthew, all the way back to Abraham. And in this time, family descendancy, ancestors, that kind of thing, knowing who your fathers were and who your lineage went through was a very important thing. It is kind of still today. That's probably, why ancestry.com is so popular. We like to see where where we come from. And so that was the same thing back then, but it was really, really, really important back in this day. And so Matthew's audience, for sure, there would have been a issue or a thing they would have wanted to focus on, and definitely Luke's as well. And so we see that in Matthew. He starts out. He used the words Christos or Christo, which is rendered Christ, Messiah, the Anointed One. It's used a lot in the Old Testament, primarily to describe like kings, other figures of high authority, prophets, and so when Matthew uses this word, he's applying the term to Jesus, which connects him to David through a kingship type or kingly role. And so that's what we're looking at there. He also starts, Matthew, you'll notice here, Matthew starts with Abraham and then works his way down, whereas Luke starts with Jesus and then works his way backwards. So it's kind of interesting why. I don't know why one went one direction, one went the other one, but that they decided to do that for whatever reason. But anyways, Abraham was told, if you go back and read the Old Testament, we see this in Genesis 12:3 as well, that he was going to bless, or that he was going to be the source of blessings for all people, which was basically, God was telling him in the end. He didn't understand it at the time, that he was going to be, that the whole world's going to be blessed through his seed, through which would be Jesus. So it's an interesting the way the ancestry's listed there, but he starts with Abraham. The other thing that's interesting about Matthew's account is he actually lists five women in his genealogy, which is never really done. Because it was always done through the men. It was never done through the women. So for him to list five different women, and really the several of the women that he listed here are not reputable women either. Reputable women. It's an interesting thing that he would do this as well, because you know back then women, it didn't really matter who their lineage was, who they come through, or whose line came through them. They weren't referred to. We'll see more as we go through this. Women were considered more property back then. So, but let's look at these real quick. So the verse 3 is Tamar, who was the neglected widow, um, you know, who used deceit to order her to get her rights. We see that in Genesis 38, 26. And then Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute who the Israelite spies, who hid Israelite spies because she knew that Yahweh had given them the promised land. We see that in Joshua 2:9. And then we have Ruth, which, we have the book of Ruth in the Old Testament, was the great grandmother of King David. You see that in Ruth 4:17. Then we have the widow of Uriah, which refers to Bathsheba, who was the woman that David committed adultery with. We see that in 2 Samuel 11. And so, and then lastly, you have Mary, who was listed, who was married to Joseph. And so we see this, and it's if you want to set up a lineup for the descendants of the Messiah, some of these are not good lists to have. So it's an interesting, but what I like about this is it goes back to the Jesus coming into this world was not a, oh, he's coming in of high authority or high kingmanship or high any of this stuff. He came and his beginnings were very humble, and he wasn't afraid, or God wasn't afraid to show that his background was very humble too. Now there's obviously King David, there's some other things that are there, but also it shows the humbleness that he came from, that he's there, that they're willing to list some of these people in this list. And so I like that because it shows, or it keeps us from going back to this, oh well, this self-righteousness that sometimes that creeps into Christianity a little bit. We have to remember that Christ had some humble backgrounds too, and so we need to remember that as Christians when we look forward. The other thing we skip into is Luke, and like I said, Luke lists backwards. So it's interesting. I don't know why they did that, but and he also goes all the way back to Adam, where Matthew did just Abraham. But and also in Luke, it flows through Nathan, the younger son of David, whereas Matthew goes through Solomon. And part of this is if we've been talking about is Luke narrates through Mary's point of view, and then Matthew is going through Joseph. So what happens is, since they do that, Matthew goes through Joseph's lineage and Luke goes through Mary's lineage, and so that's the reason you have the difference there. And so we see that, and it starts with verse 23 with Jesus beginning his ministry. He began his ministry about 30-year old. We're gonna look at that. That was the age when a Levite became of priestly service. And then finally in verse 38, where he finishes because he's going backwards, Adam is called the son of God. And some people, there's been some confusion with that sometimes. Well, why is Adam called the son of God? Well, the reason it's called the son of God is because Adam was directly created by God. It was not that he is like Jesus in any sense or anything like that. So I just wanted to clear that up. So just a little bit of background into the back side of Jesus' ancestry. Again, I know most of the time, I know I'm guilty of this. When I come to this, I just usually skip over it and go on down to it when when we see any of the lineages or the ancestors. But it's important to understand the background of who some of these people were and why they are there, and why we see them listed. And it also points to that Jesus was who he says he was. They can trace his lineage back on both sides to David and to Abraham, and then even to Adam. So that's kind of the importance of that. So again, a lot of these are not super exciting, but a little bit of information in there. I hope it's something that you can learn, and I appreciate you watching the video. Thank you.